So while they are fake impeaching the president, which amounts to a hill of beans because they cannot remove him from office because of the Republican dominated Senate quietly removed a prohibition against white nationalists serving in the U.S. military after the House of Representatives approved the language earlier this year, the same House of Representatives that voted to impeach Trump, but they cannot remove him because of the Republican dominated Senate. The change occurred in a recently passed National Defense Authorization Act, which allocated President Donald Trump the largest military budget in U.S. history. Democrats and Republicans allocated some $738 billion for fiscal year 2020 against the protests of some left-wing and libertarian-influenced members of Congress. In July of this year, the House approved the following language. Section 530. Study regarding screening individuals who seek to enlist in the armed forces. Study. The Secretary of Defense shall study the feasibility of in background investigations and security and sustainability screenings of individuals who seek to enlist in the armed forces. Screening for white nationalists and individuals with ties to white nationalist organizations. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and his GOP colleagues, however, stripped the white nationalists and white nationalist organization language from the final NDAA, which is currently awaiting the president's signature during a recent reconciliation meeting between the House and Senate negotiators in favor of a more general reference to extremists and gang-related activity. So they proposed legislation to try to keep white nationalists, aka white supremacists, out of the armed forces. And the Republican-dominated Senate switched up the language and basically targeted Black people. The above cited amendment was authored and introduced by Rep. Peter Aguilar in California in an explicit bid to study the possibility of screening and keeping white nationalists from joining the armed forces after several high-profile incidents from the past year revealed that white nationalists had made efforts to infiltrate the military. Now, don't forget, I just did the posts about how when the representative in Washington, Matt Shea, were getting people to come, a lot of them were military. In February, self-described white nationalist Christopher Hansen was arrested for allegedly planning a massive terrorist attack against several high-profile liberal and left-wing politicians and college professors, as well as various media figures. The U.S. Coast Guard and lieutenant was later indicted on various firearm and drug charges. In March and April, Huffington Post reporter Christopher Mathias discovered that 11 service members spread throughout every branch of the military except for the Navy had been allowed to join up and serve. Those 11 individuals were found to be members of white nationalist group Identity Europa. The hate group is best known for planning the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, which resulted in the death of 32-year-old socialist Heather Heyer. Aguilera harshly criticized
a measure in the National Defense Authorization Act that's meant to encourage screening for white nationalists among military recruits no longer contains the phrase white nationalists, thanks to a quiet move by the Senate. The Huffington Post first reported on the change Tuesday. It was later confirmed by other media outlets that compared the House and Senate versions of the NDAA. The amendment was originally passed by the House back in July. It calls on the Secretary of Defense to study the feasibility of screening for white nationalists and individuals with ties to white nationalist organizations. But the final version of the legislation passed by the Senate does not specifically reference white nationalism. Instead, it encourages screening for extremist and gang-related activity. Representative Pete Aguilar introduced the House amendment, and he says he's disappointed with the change. He told CNN, "I introduced my amendment because keeping this hateful ideology out of our military is crucial. We can't address the problem if we won't acknowledge there is one." But a spokesperson for the Senate Armed Services Committee called Aguilar's comment absurd, saying the language in the amendment was expanded to include extremist organizations of all kinds.
as of now, it's unclear which Republican senator or senators was directly responsible for the marked linguistic shift. In response to media coverage, a Senate Armed Services Committee spokesperson told CNN that Aguilar's complaint was absurd because what about other extremists? Ain't that the language from the amendment, which was agreed to in bipartisan vote by both House and Senate, was expanded beyond Rep. Aguilar's amendment to include extremist organization of all kinds. White nationalists, radical Muslims, gang members, and others who aren't suitable to join the military. Now, I have said on numerous occasions, no new laws. I told you that the white supremacists have control of the laws. If you try to put forth a law to protect us, they will stop it at every turn. Here, they took a law that people tried to use to weed out the white nationalists, white supremacists from the military, and they flipped the language to gang members and Muslims. No new laws. If they were going to protect you, they would protect you under the laws that are already on the books, but they don't. No new laws. We can't enforce them for our benefit, so no new laws. It's ridiculous.
Understanding a system, a total system structure. You know, I think we have had understanding, an insufficient understanding of racism. So black people, maybe at one point we thought when we were in formal slavery that if they took the chains off, that would answer our problem. And the chains were off, and then laws were put in place by people who classify themselves as white. And so then we identified our struggle as changing the laws and the civil rights era. And we thought that would solve the problem. And then we come 50 years later, and the laws that were changed have begun to move into reverse. And so it's like going in a circle, repeating the same thing over and over again. And I think until we really begin to understand system structure, a total system structure, and this is based on the important work, the very important work of Neely Fuller Jr. in his textbook for victims of racism and white supremacy. He was the first to point out that we are dealing with a total system that has as its goal objective maintaining the power equation of white power over a non-white powerlessness. And so it's not just a matter of changing one law or 10 laws. If it's a system, then it will move forward and then it will move into reverse in terms of the welfare and well-being of black people. But we now can begin to understand the system structure and be able to think in terms of countering the system of racism and white supremacy, which again begins with the work of Neely Fuller Jr. and his textbook on victims of racism and white supremacy.